Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we take a look at the underrated rogue, Dr. Polaris. Dr. Polaris, real name Neal Emerson, was introduced in Green Lantern 21, published in 1963. The story called The Man Who Mastered Magnetism was written by John Broome and penciled by Kane. In it we meet Dr. Neal Emerson, a scientist obsessed with magnetism. Emerson believes that exposing oneself to magnetic current is the key to gaining a healthy lifestyle. According to his own experiments, he's grown a lot stronger and energetic by doing so, and he then decides to share his secret with the world. Emerson takes on the moniker of Dr. Polaris and begins to attend conventions, preaching his message. Soon this Dr. Polaris becomes a media sensation, taking the country by storm, and millions of people follow his advice to make good use of magnetic current. However, due to all the numerous experiments performed on himself, the Doctor has developed a second, evil persona, the polar opposite of the kind-hearted Emerson. Fashioning himself a costume, this Mr. Hyde personality becomes a supervillain, using magnetic weapons and devices, stealing money from the very people Neal Emerson sought to help. It's up to Earth's Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, to stop this new menace. Dr. Polaris returned to haunt GL a few times throughout the Silver Age, and changed his costume in his second appearance to something a bit more menacing. Over time, he also appeared to gain actual magnetic powers. 1968 featured his last big appearance for over a decade, and the character didn't return until an issue of World's Finest in 1979. This comic featured a Black Lightning backup tale, and in it Jefferson Pierce fights Polaris, who's for some reason switched back to his original costume. You could definitely say that the 1970s was a low point for the character. He then returned, however, for a three-parter in Green Lantern the very next year. In this epic, Dr. Polaris is more powerful than he's ever been, and he's finally realized the true potential of magnetism. Using his enhanced powers, Polaris takes command over thousands of people, and then plans to seize control of the very magnetic forces that glue the universe together. The 80s proved to be a much better decade for the character than the 70s, as in the following years, Polaris didn't just appear in more issues of Green Lantern, but also in other corners of the DC universe. He fought Wonder Woman, Starman, Power Girl, plus appeared in the seminal arc Crisis on Infinite Earths. Then came the 90s, and the Good Doctor received a visual revamp in the pages of The Ray, a 6-issue miniseries published in 1992. This costume is what most people, including myself, consider to be the definitive look for the guy. I mean, it's definitely the most badass. During this period, Polaris began to drift further and further away from Green Lantern, and instead popped up all over the DC universe. Among others, he fought the Flash, Aquaman, and Damage, and he was also included in the demon Neron's Inner Circle in the Underworld Unleashed event. I'd say that's quite an indicator to his power, as the other Circle members were Abracadabra, Lex Luthor, Cirque, and the freaking Joker. Okay, Kadabra ain't such a big deal, but to be considered on the same level as those other three, yeah, Polaris has certainly come up in the world. Another notable appearance was in a 2-part Superman story in 2005, where the Good Doctor gives the Man of Steel a run for his money, and it's revealed Polaris has developed a third personality, a foxy yet vicious lady named Repulse. She actually turns out to be his aunt, who adopted Emerson as a kid and treated him horribly. Shortly after this, Dr. Polaris was actually killed off during Infinite Crisis for some reason, and a couple of years after that, a second Polaris was introduced. His name was John Nickel, and apparently he was a follower of Emerson who then seized the mantle of Polaris after the original died. I've read nothing with this guy, but he seems pretty pointless. He also didn't suffer from the split personality, so yeah, basically he was just a dude with magnetic powers. During the Blackest Night event, this guy is said to have been killed by a resurrected Neal Emerson Black Lantern though, so the balance was restored. From what I've been able to gather, no version of Dr. Polaris ever appeared in the New 52, but a revamped Neal Emerson has shown up in DC Rebirth with a completely new look yet again. Seriously, this guy needs to stop it with wardrobe changes. As for other media, the character's appearances are very meager, but he was at least featured on a couple of cartoon shows, namely Justice League Unlimited and The Brave and the Bold. So Dr. Polaris is a pretty fascinating rogue, because he's split between a good and heroic man who wants to help the world, and a ruthless, power-mad lunatic who either wants to rule it or destroy it. In a lot of Polaris stories, there's a focus on the internal struggle between these two, and it's often Emerson who ends up helping the heroes defeat his evil alter ego. I guess you could say the character is like if Two-Face had superpowers, but he's still different enough that I wouldn't say he's a ripoff. It's possible his creation was inspired by Dent, however. Doc Polaris is also one damned overlooked DC villain. I myself had never even heard of him until a couple of years ago, and I've been reading Green Lantern comics for a decade now. He just didn't show up in any of the stuff I read, and that's kind of the thing, isn't it? Polaris is a Lantern rogue, but he almost never appears in Lantern stories. In the 90s, I'd say he even stopped being a GL villain entirely, and instead became one of those guys who just drifts around the DC universe, showing up here and there. That's not really a good thing, even though they did try to push him as a major rogue, as Underworld Unleashed is evident of. And he keeps getting referred to as an extremely powerful and dangerous individual in the comics, which he indeed is, as he's shown when fighting all these heroes. Despite that, nothing really big ever became of him, and I think that's because he lost his home in the Green Lantern books. A villain can't really survive without belonging in a rogues gallery, except for a few like Darkseid, who's managed to do that. Some people say Darkseid is a Superman rogue, but I don't really consider him to be. What I think should be done, or actually what should have been done long ago, is make him Hal Jordan's nemesis on Earth. Just like most people, I prefer Lantern stories taking place in space and on alien planets, but every now and then I want an Earth GL story. And for those occasions, who better for Jordan to fight than Polaris? Sinestro can be his intergalactic archenemy, while Polaris is his Earth archenemy. Now, if you don't want to do that, and keep him as an all-around DC rogue, then give him a damn event, a big crossover where he's the main villain, or at least one of the main villains. He's said to be so freaking powerful, so I think it could pull it off. The character does have another strike against him, however, that might be hindering his breakthrough. And this strike is of course a dude named Magneto. When you talk about villains with magnetic powers, who everyone thinks of is of course not Dr. Polaris, but Magneto. He's basically overshadowed Emerson, and many who don't know better probably assume Polaris is a Magneto ripoff. But actually, if anything, it's good old Mags who's the ripoff, as Emerson was created a few months before him. I don't know if Stan Lee ripped DC off there. I mean, it certainly could be just a coincidence that two magnetic villains were created the same year. This, and that he's kinda similar to Harvey Dent, probably does hurt the character, but I personally like him and think he deserves more credit. I really dig his visual design too. That is the third costume, the purple one from the 90s, with a metal mask and a cape. His earlier outfits are admittedly pretty corny, especially the first one. Talk about a budget supervillain costume. So there you have it. That's the story of underrated rogue Dr. Polaris, the guy who's not a Magneto ripoff. I think he's got a lot of potential and should appear a lot more, preferably fighting Hal Jordan. Let me know in the comments what you think of this guy. And as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.